Thank you so much for coming out on this rainy day, and thank you for letting us be your host. My name is Madeline Grinstein. I'm director of the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago. I want to welcome you to today's conversation between Arthur Jafa and Theaster Gates for the opening of Arthur Jafa Works from the MCA Collection. Before we get to the conversation, we all have a big favor to ask of each other, which is a reminder to please turn off your phones, unless, of course, you're using them for captioning. So thank you for taking a minute to do that. Thank you for coming. Thank you to our generous funders. I believe that this screen shows who they are, and we are all very grateful for the way that they help literally fiscally fuel our work. Arthur Jafa Works from the MCA Collection is an exhibition that is organized by Rene Morales, who's here today, our former chief curator, and Jack Schneider, our assistant curator. It surveys the artist's output over roughly the last 10 years through a selection of works held in the MCA's collection, including videos like Apex, Love is the Message is Death, and the White Album. In fact, the MCA has one of the largest holdings of Arthur Jafa's work in the world, making this presentation particularly key to understanding the range of his artistic practice. Originally from Tupelo, Mississippi, Arthur Jafa currently lives in Los Angeles and is an artist and a filmmaker. His films have garnered acclaim at the Los Angeles, New York, and Black Star Film Festivals, and his artwork is represented in celebrated collections and exhibitions worldwide, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Museum of Modern Art, the Tate, and so on. Utilizing found imagery, music, and artistic techniques such as montage, collage, Jafa has constructed an extensive assemblage of Black expression, layered and arranged in ways that reveal the complex realities of Black being. Arthur Jafa is joined on stage this afternoon by his longtime friend and colleague and great Chicago citizen, artist and changemaker Theaster Gates, an artist and social innovator who lives and works here. Gates has exhibited and performed widely, nationally and internationally, including London's Serpentine Pavilion Commission, New York's New Museums Retrospective, the Walker Arts Center in Minneapolis, Documenta 13 in Kassel, Germany, and as we speak, in Tokyo's Mori Museum, he has a gorgeous retrospective called Afro Mingue. In 2010, Theaster created the Rebuild Foundation, which I would urge you to visit in the South Side. It's a nonprofit platform for art, cultural development, and neighborhood transformation that supports artists and strengthens communities through free art programming and innovative cultural amenities in the Grand Crossing neighborhood of the South Side. Over the past decade, Theaster has translated the intricacies of Blackness through space theory and land development, sculpture, and performance. Through the expansiveness of his approach as a thinker, maker, performer, builder, he extends the role of the artist as an agent of change. We are in for a very special conversation between two people who are great artists and also great friends. So with that, if you can join me in welcoming to the MCA stage, Arthur Jafa and Theaster Gates.
This is Arthur Jafa. I'm Theaster. AJ and I know each other pretty well, so neither of us have prepared very much for this talk.
You say very much?
We haven't prepared very much. Have you
Not
prepared very much?
Yeah, no.
And I didn't know, AJ, if I was interviewing you because you have work here or if we were in conversation with each other.
Conversation.
Okay. And then, do we have to talk about the 4 works upstairs alone, or can we talk about anything?
No, not necessary. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think we didn't specify, but I'm assuming we're going to we have time for Q&A at the end.
Would you all like a Q&A?
Definitely.
So AJ, I did bring along I'm not supposed to show I brought some glasses so that. Where are your glasses?
I took mine off.
You took yours off?
Yeah. Oh, yours are nicer than mine.
Really. So I did that for AJ. I'm not going to wear those. Because I need to see. AJ, man, thank you, bro, for being in Chicago.
Yeah.
And thank you for what you've contributed to our lives. I would say that AJ has contributed to our lives. Would you guys agree with that? And I actually did make some notes. So I'm gonna read to you my notes in the hope that it could. George Clinton. Ballad of Michael and Miles.
Oh, huh. Michael Jackson.
Yeah. Why don't we start with Michael and Miles?
Wow. Interesting. And
Just jump in.
That's a total jump in. Wow. I'm obsessed, obviously, with both of them.
Yeah.
I mean, like hearing their names in one sentence makes me think, well, what's the relationship between the two?
Yeah.
I mean, beyond the fact, clearly, that they were both extraordinary, like figures in the 20th century, I would say. I would often say, if I had Michael Jackson's resources, I would have been the anti-Michael Jackson. Mm-hmm. And by that, I mean, like, I would have gotten cosmetic surgery to make myself like blue-black. Yeah. Like, I would have gotten darker and darker and darker and darker.
Which brings us to Miles.
That's what that's the point, yeah. So, I've talked about Michael. It's funny, it's like we had a conversation at 52 Walker in New York a few weeks ago, and Michael Jackson came up. Somebody asked a question about Michael Jackson, and I said something from the stage that friends of mine have heard me say, but I've never said it in public. And I've said quite a few things about Michael Jackson in public. Maybe the year after he died, or maybe it wasn't even a year, they had a thing at the Schomburg called After the Dance. It was like a kind of celebration of Michael Jackson. And I think I actually ended up filling in for Greg, actually, who had some schedule change. So I filled in for Greg, and I kind of went off a little bit, in public. I mean, the first time, it's funny, when I came to the bar, so that's like, what is that?
2014?
2014, maybe, yeah. And I came there not as an artist, because that's like Pride of Love is a message. I came there as a sort of observer and as a filmmaker. Taquasi Dyson had seen my film, Dreams Are Colder Than Death, and said, yeah, you should come and show this at bar. But I remember walking in, and the first person who ran up to me was actually Derek Adams. Yeah. And he ran up to me, he said, I know you. Yeah. You're the Michael Jackson dude from YouTube. Yeah. And I was like, okay. But I had talked about Michael Jackson, I guess, in a way, in a kind of way that I thought he deserves to be talked about with a certain level of, for one, sophistication, but also sort of mythic dimensions of him, and also to just make some things that I thought were super apparent. Everybody should know we should start with, like, Michael Jackson was a nigga from the future, one, okay? Two, Michael Jackson was a shapeshifter that people underestimate or under-theorize, maybe it's been under-thought or under-theorized, the nature of how he presented himself. And I sort of shared a story that a friend had shared with me about Michael Jackson in Brazil with Spike now. They were making a video, They Don't Care About Us. Yeah. Apparently the Brazilian officials were like super anxious about him being there because they wanted to shoot in the favelas and things like that. The favelas are like not, they're sort of they're sort of corralled, but not controlled, you know. So they were very nervous about, they didn't want Michael Jackson to come there and something to go down with Michael Jackson there. And so they were having all these meetings in the production office, and my friend says, it was Spike, the Brazilian officials, Michael Jackson, and like a producer or two. And they said Michael was there the whole time. And he was just sort of quietly taking notes while the people were going back and forth, because you got to have, translation, Portuguese, this whole thing. And eventually they came to some decisions. Everybody left, and it was just the production manager and Michael. And he said Michael just turned to him and said, in a perfectly tenor, black dude from Gary, Indiana voice, turned to him and said, damn, I thought those motherfuckers weren't gonna never leave, And he was like, he said he was like shocked, like he almost fell out of his chair because up until that point he had just heard Michael with that voice.
Yeah.
And the thing about it, that's why I say he was a shapeshifter, because that voice on a level of strategy, and he was he was a tactician, if nothing else. But on a level of strategy, it's so incredible because, one, it deflects the main thing that black men have to deal with, which is like, how black masculinity is threatening. So by presenting himself basically as an arrested child, he sort of deflects some of that. I don't think Paul McCartney would have ever shared with him that the Beatles catalog was available for sale if it had been like Teddy Pendergrass or something like that. You know what I mean? He would have been like,
it was up here.
I'm not sharing no information with this nigga, So, but because Michael was like that, so you can see how it's a really brilliant strategy. Even down to him changing his features and all this kind of stuff. It's all, he was always very disturbed when people said that he didn't want to be black. He was perplexed by that. You can see it in all the interviews. You can just see it on his face. Because I think most people sometimes people have a hard time grasping is that you could be absolutely certain of your blackness and still have self-loathing. Yeah. Like those two things are not mutually exclusive. Like if you look in his art, in his space where he expressed himself, he's a classicist. He's not nearly as, like, say, eclectic as Prince or or George Clinton or somebody like that. His thing is, it's R&B. Now it's R&B turbocharged to a certain degree. I mean, he is like Barry Gordy's Frankenstein monster.
But he committed to a form.
Yeah, totally.
He committed to a form.
Yeah. So when you see that work, it's like, that's where you can see that he was totally black identified in how he expressed himself. But that doesn't mean he liked the way he looked. Yeah. Yeah. So
there was, I can remember, Michael Jackson has been a recurring theme in me and AJ's personal conversations, and it could go from black genius to monsterism, and kind of thinking about, or at least for me, thinking about mutilation and contortion as a kind of adaptability or a way of being received, and kind of chipping away at the nose. Mm-hmm. Chipping away at the nose the way the way Caesar would have chipped away at a big nose to erase,
like Napoleon and blowing the noses off.
You know what I'm saying?
Statues
yeah, blow that motherfucker off.
Yeah, yeah.
And in as much as we're talking about Michael and I'm thinking about Miles, I'm thinking about the condition of creativity in the contortions that we make, in the self-mutilation that we do in order to be seen, and in order for that the way that people see us to register as something that is familiar to them, familiar to a power, and that in a way we can't see it, we don't see it as mutilation. It's also not assimilation.
Right.
It's something else that's like, it's a purchasable. It's like, I'm gonna demonstrate my willingness to monster that you might love me, that you all might love me, that you all might see a little bit of yourselves in me or something.
Right. And the thing about it too, he's not however we feel about it. Like sometimes I have a certain level of revulsion about it when I look at that aspect of him. But it's kind of hard to argue with the idea that he made himself much more transmissible lovable, as you said, by landing the way he landed.
Yeah.
It definitely made him, it allowed him to flow
Yeah.
internationally in a way that it's only speculate. We can't speculate. I've often speculated,
Right.
like if Michael Jackson had stopped at Thriller.
Right.
I literally remember the moment I first laid my eyes on the cover of Thriller. That's how shocking it was. My friend Shirikiana, I was crashing in her apartment for a few weeks at the end of the school year in Washington, D.C., and I walked into her space, and the Thriller album was just leaning at the top of her record stacks. And I went right over and looked at it. Who is that for a second? And I would say, fuck, Michael Jackson, God damn. You know what I mean? It just seems so startling, like how much he had altered his face. But if you look back on Michael Jackson at that album, now he looked normal on that album.
Yeah.
Like super normal.
Yeah. And you know, that Thriller, Thriller had all the greats, to conspire to make the thing, but that he was going from himself to a kind of zombie, a kind of
No, zombie is a good, I would say a samurai.
Yeah.
I mean, in the sense that if you read like the Hagakure, which is the Bible of the samurai, the first line in it, and the basic ethos of it, you don't really need to read any further than that. Everything after the first line is just an elaboration. It says the way of the samurai is the way of death. Yeah. And they say what samurais did, they trained themselves at thinking themselves as walking corpses. Yeah. Because if they saw themselves as walking corpses, they wouldn't hesitate to put their lives on the line to protect their masters because they didn't have a life. Yeah. And it had parts in there where they say, like, always wash your underwear. Make sure that your presentation is tight because you never know when you're going to die. Yeah. And you want to make sure you look tight, you know? And that's very consistent with Michael Jackson's thinking. So the zombie thing is, I think, not that far off in a certain kind of way.
Well, if we take Michael Jackson and this idea that he went from Gary to a kind of otherness, and then you land that somewhere between the film Apex and Love's the Message, there are moments when AJ is taking the contusions on a forehead, turning that into the topography on a map, turning that into an actor's presentation in a film, mm-hmm. and that thing happens so quick that you could almost imagine that Miles's frown is in some way connected to topography, mm-hmm. or mm-hmm. the burden of Miles, the weight of addiction might also be geographical. Like, you hit him so fast. Or it could be a play. It could be that, Miles could have had on makeup that day that made his frown look more like mm-hmm. A mound. Right. And I think about, like, say, in this case, I've never regarded your work as found or assembled images. It's almost like a kind of, what does it mean to be comfortable looking at Blackness in all its complexity, mm-hmm. and that when you're looking at Blackness in this way, you're looking at it both from Black self-presentation to like Blackness as a result of all these things. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like in those moments where you're looking at scenes of Black life, right. but they're the result of something. Right. So in that sense, I feel like you're wielding. You're offering us a kind of complexity, and that for some reason it's more like wizardry. It's not found, right. and the internet is not a sourcing device. It's kind of like there are some things that you look at that I don't find on the internet. Yeah. I'm not interested in going to those places. Right. But you don't have a problem going to the far reaches of ugliness and despair.
Because on a certain level, the whole eye, beauty is in the eye of the beholder and ugliness is in the eye of the beholder as well. It's like, I don't really, I know intellectually the difference between the two. like nominal ideas of what beauty is and all this kind of stuff. But beyond a certain point, there's no difference, you know? And the main thing is like to be able to look at the thing in a non-Cartesian way, like it's not inside or outside. You know, you're just looking at the thing. Like I like to say oftentimes that, you know, one of Black people's classical superpowers is our ability to see things as they are. Yeah. You know, we say keeping it real and all this kind of stuff, but it just means to see the thing as it is, not as we would want it to be, hope it would be, frightened of it being, just seeing it for what it is and then going from there. Like I like to think, Black people, we can lie to other people, but we don't generally lie to ourselves, you know? And it's a really important like distinction to me. Like it's so funny on the whole thing of you know, the form, and it's like an associative chain. This one guy, I think he thought he was trying to insult me in the beginning. I think he was trying to insult me. He said like, your things are just vines. Mediocre vines. Do people even remember what vines were now? It's a term, like a boomerang or something like that, I guess. And I was like, it may be a vine, but it's not mediocre. You know what I mean? I didn't have a problem with him designating it as a vine. I was like, if it was so mediocre or if it was so easy, which is what he was implying, then, you know, the footage is free. There'd be 1,000 Love Is the Messages out here. We need 1,000 Love Is the Messages. But so for me, it's like the whole idea of Michael Jackson is like all of these figures, Olympian. I mean, they're basically Orishas to me. Like Michael Jackson is Orisha, Miles Davis is an Orisha, and they're not like in the Western Judeo-Christian kind of thing of saints or people who you want to emulate. It's not about emulating them. It's about thinking about them as entities that made certain choices and thinking through the implications of the choices they made, and not just like judging them to be good or bad. So it's easy to judge Michael Jackson's choices to be good or bad. I think it's way more interesting to think about what the implications of his choices were and how some of them were things that he chose and some of them things that he was just sort of born into. That's why I say, you know, not to take any agency away from him, but he certainly, like I say, it was the Frankenstein monster of Berry Gordy. Berry Gordy had a certain vision for Black music, and it was like music as the sound of young America, not the sound of young Black America. As the sound of, and you know, from the Big Chill and all these kinds of things, you know, that is the music that evokes for so many people who are Black, like their adolescence in those times in their lives and stuff. So Michael Jackson was built to be the ultimate crossover kind of thing. You know, like for me personally, you know, people had this argument. I got into an argument with people about it on that actual panel. I was like, his masterpiece to me, now not to say that things need to be reduced to masterpieces, but his greatest single work to me is Off the Wall. That's it. Like, Thriller is good. It sold a bunch of records, but, you know, selling a bunch of records.
I don't know if everybody's heard Off the Wall, but I think Spotify, we could start a playlist.
I mean, Off the Wall, if you put Off the Wall on, it's timeless. You put Thriller on, it sounds dated. It sounds dated, actually. It feels very periodized, you know what I mean? And Bad is just bad. Now, I fought with people about this. I don't like Bad. I never liked Bad. I acknowledge that there's some classics on
You don't like Bad, but you okay with Ugly.
Well, Bad, of course, is good. We can go down that. But you know what I mean? But like for me, it's like Off the Wall is his purest thing. And then Thriller was a thing he made in a certain kind of anger or a certain kind of resentment that Off the Wall wasn't fully acknowledged for the bona fide, flat-out masterpiece that it was. It sold a bunch of records and it got some Grammys, but it didn't get the pop Grammys. It didn't get nominated for Best Album of the Year, those kinds of things.
But you're saying that that's something that happened between Off the Wall and Thriller that changed Michael.
His desire to be loved universally. Which I think was there the whole time, but I think he thought, if I make an amazing record, I'm gonna get the acknowledgement that, you know, that I deserve, and when that didn't happen, it definitely, you know, there's a science fiction novel, The Star Is My Destination, Gullyfoyle, he's trapped on a ship, it's deserted in the outer space, and he just reverts to almost like subhuman thing, and then a ship comes by that
Yeah.
can save him, sees him, and then leaves him.
Yeah.
And it triggers something in Gully Foyle's head. That's why the book is called "The Star Is My Destination." It's like kickstart something in him, and I think something got kickstarted, ignited in Michael Jackson when Off the Wall wasn't received the way it deserved to be received. Like, it was acknowledged, but, you know, in his soul, it was a triple platinum album or whatever. So then he went to Thriller, you know, and Thriller was built
To be something
sell.
else. Yeah.
Yeah, it was built to sell.
So y'all, I mean, I don't know if y'all get it, but like this is why I call AJ in the middle of the night when I'm in Japan, because maybe we could spend this whole time acting like we're talking about Michael Jackson, but I actually think that you're getting to this thing, kind of this ambitious thing. The destination is to get to this other place. You get to the other place, you're the only mug in that place. And then that place remakes you.
Right.
And then loneliness, isolation, and the truth of the state of that place changes you so much so that you are unidentifiable to the folk that came from the place where you're from. You are something else, you know, and I think that's at least, you know. So, you know, I want to talk about your off the wall moment, or this moment between Off the Wall and Thriller, and then I'll get into the politics of that. But there was a time when you identified as a craftsman, as a gun for hire, as a cinematographer, as a film
head.
You were a film head.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get from AJ, and this is right around the time we met.
Right.
That there was a kind of, I would love for you to talk, AJ, about what happened from the time of making films for others to the time of making films for yourself. Like, can you lay out a territory for us? Fuck.
I can kind of narrate it a little bit. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily put it as AJ as a gun for hire or a cinematographer and then AJ as an artist.
Okay.
It would be more like AJ as a person who was full of ambition and optimism, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And just excitement about black aesthetics and all these kind of things, and hitting rock bottom. I've sort of talked about this in public, like maybe once, huh? Berkeley. Who's this? Who was at Berkeley? Who is that? But how did you see that? Oh, you were there. That's what I meant. Because it's not online. It's not online.
That's what she do.
So I was like, who is this? Yeah, no. So you saw it. She saw it. She saw it. Basically, it was 2 nights. I did a conversation with this, really brilliant sister the night before. Then I did a conversation with Greg the second night. So in some ways, I had kind of covered the ground.
Yeah.
So, and then Greg is the person I talk to more than anybody, So it meant that there was a sort of kind of not wanting to say the same things again. Yeah. And this sister, towards the end of the talk, this young sister asked me this question. She it was something like, and it's so funny, people told me a year later, well, that sister's a witch. This is what they told me that. Oh, wow. I didn't know it at the time, but she asked me this question. It was like 2 parts, or maybe I'm collapsing 2 young black women. But one question was, you seem to have chosen the art world over the film world. Do you think the art world is a better situation or context for black filmmakers? And then the other question was sort of like a more general question I get, like, how do you get from there to here?
Yeah.
And I try to, in Q&As in particular, it's just my rule of thumb. I just try to answer them as honestly and as transparently as I can. And as I was trying to get my head wrapped around how to answer it, it just hit me. I don't know how else to describe it. I just started crying. And it was it was tough. You know, it was a tough moment. I was embarrassed. And when I realized I was gonna start crying, I remember just looking around for like somewhere to hide.
Yeah.
Like if they had been a rock, I would have died behind the rock, you know?
Yeah.
And I think I would have just gotten up and just walked off the stage if that wouldn't have been more whatever, you know, than
unnecessarily
just
dramatic.
Yeah, exactly. So I basically just ended up putting my head down and crying and sobbing. And I've seen the video of it. You know, it like on the video, it looks not nearly as extreme as it felt. It was like an out-of-body experience. Like, Greg just leaned over and put his hands on my shoulders and just said, take your time. And I basically just said, hey, like, first of all, if I could give you a map for this is not a route you want to take. Yeah. This is not the way to do it.
Yeah.
First of all. And secondly, I was like, I didn't choose the art world. The art world chose me. Mm-hmm. It was like I fell off the back of a truck and bumped my head and I was in the art world, you know? So I made like Love Is a Message. I wasn't thinking about no art world as an option. I wanted to show it on YouTube, you know? And all my friends, and at the top of that list, I would put Khalil and Greg. It was just saying, don't put it on YouTube. They kept telling me, don't put it on YouTube, don't put it on YouTube. And I was like, why? I want people to see it. And Khalil, unbeknownst to me, I've told this story before, unbeknownst to me, took it to Art Basel in Switzerland with him and showed it before he showed his cut of Beyonce, because he directed Lemonade. And he just showed it like with no introduction, no nothing. And Gavin Brown happened to be in the audience, and I've heard it from both sides, from Khalil's side and from Gavin's side. Ran up to Khalil afterwards and said, hey, what the hell was that came on before Lemonade? That's my boy AJ's thing. Gavin tracked me down. That's how I ended up in the art world. You know, it wasn't like I didn't go to art school or anything like that. So, like, that's what I'm saying. It's not so much I would put it as like me being a gun for hire, because honestly, the truth of the fact is, you know, it's funny, they just had the 30th anniversary of Crooklyn. Uh-huh. So I got called about it. Dry actually sent me a note and said, hey, would you participate? You know, and she knows that, well, she doesn't, she knows this, but, you know, I was gonna participate regardless, but that wasn't like a pleasant experience for me. That was a very traumatic experience for me. And so the whole idea of being a cinematographer, I have a certain kind of, there's a kind of ambiguity around my career as a cinematographer. If I look back at the end of the day, the things that I'm most proud of in general are like documentaries. I shot documentaries of a lot of amazing people. Like I said, the thing about a great documentary, working on a great documentary is like, you get the answer to questions you would have never even thought to ask. Yeah. You meet people you would have never even asked to meet. Yeah. You know, I shot a documentary, it's the documentary about Audre Lorde, called Litany for Survival. And you know, and I remember the last time I saw Audre Lorde, we were in St. Croix, and I had gotten to know her a little bit, and she was sitting on her couch outside, and she had dozed off. Of course, you know, she had cancer on and off. And I was like, oh, I'm not gonna bother waking her up to say we're leaving now, because I'm gonna see her in 6 days back in New York, and her oncologist, and she died, you know? So, but like in terms of shooting, I loved shooting for other people. Yeah. There just wasn't enough work to make a living. Yeah. At the end of the day, you know, I turned down, man, it's so wild. I was talking to my friend Steve Coleman just the other night. He told me something that kind of blew my mind. I think I'm not going to say it in public because I don't know if it was cool, but it made me think about like the paths that I haven't taken like in my life, you know, because there've been many. Like, for example, after Daughters, I got sent the script to White Man or White Man Can't Jump, and I was like, what does this sound like, a coon show or something to me? Like, White Man Can't Jump, what is this? I wasn't put here to do this, you know what I mean? Like the people who trained me, the Haile Garimas and the Ben Caldwells, that's not what they built me for, you know? Yeah. So I didn't even, and I remember seeing the movie like and say, oh, this is not bad, this is cool. I was asked by Wong Kar-wai to shoot a film. Oh, wow. at the New York Film Festival, I met him. We've been introduced by Norman Wong, and they were showing his film Happy Together. Yeah. And he was like, this will be so great. He had seen Daughters, and he was like, I remember him taking my muscle in my arm and saying, you have good muscles, you can do great hand nails, something like this. And, but that film was like one of my all-time great favorite films. It was In the Mood for Love. Yeah. Which is his masterpiece. Yeah. And I think about like, wow, man, I actually, got asked to shoot In the Mood for Love. And some of it was fear, you know what I mean? That I wasn't ready or I wasn't able. But, honestly, that's more like judging myself harshly. Some of it was fear, but mostly it was like a kind of feeling like that wasn't my path.
Yeah. This makes me think, AJ, of the conversation between you and Jatavia. There was a moment when you guys were talking about the difference between black cinema and black people making films. And the example you gave is, let's say, Leontine Price and Jesse Norman. So AJ says, Leontine Price and Jesse Norman are both great opera singers. They're masterful in that in some way in opera, they may have brought blackness in some way. Maybe their vibrato was a little bit different, a little triple. Like their runs, they might add a little, gospel, pentatonic on top of a, Schubert situation. But they are black women operating in a pre-existing form that is wholly different from Aretha Franklin, who is making music and making music in a form that is totally birthed of the black experience. And as a result, you can freak the form differently. There's room in it. And I wonder if part of what you're offering me is that maybe it's not exactly fear, but it's the burden of a pre-existing form.
Right.
And that you are black creativity within a pre-existing form.
Right.
And are there other forms, like that this cat would call it a vine, are there other forms that need to exist that may be just different forms, that if they're birthed within blackness might produce new and wholly different forms?
Well, yeah, because it's like they're built or they evolve in response to the pressure we put on it to describe or narrate our existential circumstances. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean other human beings can't identify with those circumstances, but our circumstances are very specific. So it needs, it's the oldest analogy in the world. It's like, the Eskimos got whatever number is like 92 ways to say white, you know what I mean? And it's like, it's that kind of thing. Yeah. And going back to like, one of the earliest things, when we started on the Michael Jackson thing, this whole idea of the pressure that's put on things to behave a certain way and how that generates pain, but also possibility. I just saw this thing on YouTube just last night, and it was the first time I'd seen anybody talk about this before. They use this term, syntropic. Syntropic. And what it means is the opposite of entropy, a thing having multi-layered, possibilities of change and evolution. And he was saying that, it was a scientist, and he was saying that there have been 5 extinction level events on the earth that we know of, right? And in each instance, like the last one was when the comet hit and it destroyed the dinosaurs. And like it destroyed or eliminated like 96% of life on the face of the earth, right? But it was saying that what happens when pressure gets put on organisms, he was talking about how people's actual genes, like the brokenness of the genes that were put forward meant that those genes had the capacity to evolve to these new circumstances. So all of a sudden you go from ferns to flowering plants, or from mammals to humans, you know what I mean? All these kinds of things. So I think in a certain kind of way, that's also true, certainly true of black people. Like if I got into trouble at that same talk at 52 Walker, because I said something most of my friends have heard me say, but I haven't said it in public too often, which is that I started to think a lot about whether Africans are black or not. People get disturbed when they hear that. I don't mean it to suggest any sense of lack of solidarity or that we ourselves are not Africans. We are Africans. But I like to think when I say black, of course, there's a certain, it depends on what you mean. Like there's a socio-political designation of blackness. Of course, everybody in Africa is black.
But I would call slavery a comment.
Yeah, it is
I would say that there was a fucking disruption in a way of being and in a life, and that in a way, whatever happened on either side of water was enough to create a kind of catastrophic measure that a thing would bloom differently.
Yeah, totally.
That seems like
we are a mutant strain of Africans. I mean, if you look at the music, just for example, if you can use the music as a measure of anything, for all of the music in Africa, it's the oldest musical culture in the world, because it's the oldest musical culture in the world, right? For all of the music that's in Africa, you would have been hard-pressed in the 20th century to find anything out of Africa that sounded very, very much like a million things that came out of Black America alone, not to speak of Brazil, Jamaica, all the other places in the diaspora that black people made music. So it's like outside of Fela and maybe Hugh Masekela and those guys in South Africa, there's a certain thing about South Africa in here, but it's some new shit. It's some new shit. And that's not to say it's better shit.
Yeah, and then in some kind of way a sutured adaptability that started to happen on either side. You have work on Robert Johnson, right?
Yeah.
And that work, for a while I was really, the moments when I try to get into music, I try to listen close to that. And I was like, let me go and get up in this blues thing for real, because whenever anybody asks me about the blues, I said, Thriller's gone a long way, because, I'm Mississippi too.
Yeah.
So I just think, the folk I know, that my mom and them knew.
Right.
But I feel like in listening to Robert Johnson, there are moments where he falls out of time. He'll add an extra thing.
Yeah, totally.
He'll take a different beat. He'll add a beat, and will have no anxiety about when you get back to A. So if it's a A, B, C, A is the form. Thriller's gone, Lord. Thriller's gone, A, B, whatever that thing is. He'll just add a couple more.
The whole blues thing in the beginning, it's so wild style.
Yeah, it's wild.
It's totally, it's like they're like free jazz blues guys. It's like it got consolidated afterwards when they started notating it.
Right.
And they said it go like this, it go like this, it go like this. But if you listen to Skip James, Charlie Patton, Son House, in them cats, man, the shit is so free, man.
It was open, and it was open in the way the structure works is like, you can actually get in anywhere on the structure. So if you are both playing guitar and singing, it doesn't actually, you can land in the middle, like this conversation.
Right.
You can land in the middle and be at the beginning of blackness.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You can, like, it doesn't matter. And I think that in a way I want people to hear that in our friendship, which started because of Kerry James Marshall. Or on my end, because of Kerry James. On your end, because of Takwase.
Yeah, a little of both, because, when I realized with Takwase, I ran to her in the street. She said, you should go to bar. I was like, oh, it's invitation only? She said, oh, yeah, you can come, though. And I was like, okay. And I had just shot Dreams Are Colder Than Death.
Yeah.
And I had always wanted to do a section in Chicago, but we ran out of time and money. So I was like, oh, I'm gonna go to Chicago, because I had planned to keep working on it.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm gonna go to Chicago so I can look around Chicago.
Yeah.
And I called Carrie and said, hey, Carrie, I'm coming to Chicago. Can I crash with you guys? And Carrie just said, yeah, of course, but why don't you call Theaster? You got all this space, and and he called you, and
which
that's a story.
Kerry don't call nobody. Kerry doesn't call. He's not a caller. And if he calls, it ain't gonna be long. It's gonna, so he was like, I got this friend. He should come. And then we kicked it for a few days.
That's an understatement.
Yeah.
He's like, that's a story in itself. It could be a movie.
Should we tell them a little of it?
I mean, I can tell the first, well, I'm gonna just say the 2 or 3 things that I think mostly matter about it. But, so I'm here at bar. That was quite
That was intense.
intense in itself, you know, like arguing with people, which was exciting to me, the whole thing. And it ends on Sunday evening and everybody disperses, but I'm still there because I had planned to stay for another 3 or 4 days so I could do my little research of Chicago and see where I could shoot or who I could shoot. And so I'm staying in the house, one of the houses, and at 8 a.m. I hear a knock on the door and it's Theaster, and he say, "What you doing, blood?" I'm like, waking up, you know what I mean? He's like, "Come run with me." So I'm like,
I had been up since 6, trying to wait till a decent hour, you know, to mess with him. And I thought if I wait too long, I'm gonna lose my mind.
And so, of course, that was the beginning of several days of me. I don't know whether I was in your slipstream or whatever, but I went everywhere with Theaster for 3.5 days, into every meeting with Chicago, University of Chicago officials, with the Frankie Knuckles estate, with lawyers, I mean, it was crazy. At a certain point, I was a little like, what am I doing? I know the moment I always remember is in the Frankie Knuckles thing, because I would just sit there quietly because I didn't know why I was there. And I was learning, though. I was like, this is very interesting. And I'm just sitting there very quietly like this. And Theaster didn't even introduce me when we came in, so I just sat there. And at a certain point, they just stopped and said, "Hold it, who is this?" And Theaster, without losing the beat, said he's my spiritual advisor. You know, which I did not laugh at. I was just like.
Sometimes it's just good to have like another black body in the room that doesn't talk. You know, isn't agreeable, doesn't smile. It's just like, yeah.
As a power object.
Yeah, he's important. You know, but for me, that
it's true. You can't make this shit up.
So AJ, you know, he rolled, and I think it was a way for me also, AJ, to kind of expose myself and to say, like, if a life, this is what my life as an artist looks like. And AJ had already started to reveal, like, you know, I've been doing these things, but this is interesting. And, you know, AJ's argument, you know, it's legendary for those who were there. It was with Mike Cloud, and it was a conversation, a robust conversation about representation. And not only whether or not representation and abstraction, and whether or not abstraction had some kind of grip. Was there any way to really represent black folk, like to render black people? Or was abstraction actually a better way of understanding a black experience? Anyway, it was a lot of stuff. It got heated in that room.
Yeah,
and it felt like the room had divided, and like you know, it was very intense.
I mean, because the thing was, I wasn't invested in being on good terms with people because I didn't see it as my space.
Yeah, they
You know
were
what I mean?
artists.
I was just like, oh yeah, I remember people saying, like when we had our breakaway groups, it was like I said something and then somebody said something, I was like, hold it. You think art has any inherent value? And they were like, of course. And I was like, y'all are tripping.
Yeah.
I was like, y'all are tripping. Art has no inherent value.
Yeah.
And they were like, what are you talking about? I was like, it's not like a chicken you can eat or a lump of coal that you can heat some shit with. It don't got no value. The only value it has is assigned value. Yeah. And they took it to mean like that made it less valuable, that the value was assigned.
Yeah.
Gold, what can you do with gold?
Yeah.
You can't hardly do nothing with gold except make some dookie chains, but you know what I mean? But I'm just saying, it's not even like a diamond that can cut anything. You know, gold is not the greatest conductor. It's not, it's just, it's rare or something like that. It's more in the imagination. You know, it's like all gold is fool's gold at the end of the day, you know? And so I was like, y'all are tripping, man. this shit, it's like, it's got a sign value. And I have multiple jokes kind of that pivot on the same thing. Like one I like to tell is like I say, if some black people was on a boat and it was sinking, and there was a desert island within the swimming distance, but they can only say one thing, the Mona Lisa or a copy of Frankie Beverly and Maze. You know, the Mona Lisa's at the bottom of the ocean. Like black folks are saving that Maze copy, you know, like right straight off, man. So it's just about how this whole value thing in the visual space, it's a sign, you know?
It's beautiful, AJ, and I think maybe also your willingness to trouble value, it also shows up in the way that I think you reflect on film and filmmaking. And you know, I really wanted to talk about the Ben Gazzara piece, and I call it the taxi film. And this is the new work that you had just shown at Gladstone. And you know, turn it on. It's not gonna come on today. It ain't gonna come on today. Turn it on.
Yeah,
but
if we had thought of it, I could have brought a clip. I wasn't even thinking of it. Yeah.
But I want you to talk about it because this film is actually very important to me. But what was more important was the year and a half, 2 years that AJ and I have kind of been 3 years talking about why this is important. So precursive to some people in this audience seeing it, can you talk a little bit about your relationship with Taxi and then the evolution of this film?
Well, Taxi Driver I saw when I was a senior in high school, and it definitely had a very cathartic, transformative effect on me. It was definitely maybe the most visceral filmmaking I had ever seen. But I was definitely troubled by not only the central protagonist, who is unambiguously a racist, but the ethos of the film. It seemed like it was a racist film to me, too. But at the same time, I thought it was great. I thought it was masterful. So in this sense, it's a very early, not the earliest, but it's a very early example of something that I always return to. It's something that I've been talking about since we started talking without using the word. And the word is a word that was given to me by Carrie, talking about Carrie James Marshall. Because Carrie, when I was living in New York, Carrie came to New York one time and we would have dinner at my favorite little sushi place. And I just turned to him, I said, yo, Carrie, what's the difference between photography and painting? And without hesitation, he said, discrepancy. Without hesitation, discrepancy. And so I thought about that, and I was like, I see that. But increasingly, I started to understand, particularly as I also read like Nathaniel Mackey's book of essays. I think it's called Discrepant Codings or something like that. But the whole idea of how central this idea of discrepancy is to just black being. You know, going to the primal discrepancy of black being is that we were put in circumstances that structurally, physically, emotionally, maybe even spiritually said that we were not human, but nevertheless, we knew that we were human. Yeah. Like for several hundreds of years. Yeah. You know, and so the discrepancy between holding both of those things in our heads, that we were things and that nevertheless we still were humans, it has something to do with how black people, we're like quantum in our understanding of things. We don't understand that we understand it's not Cartesian, things can be inside and outside at the same. You can be a part of and apart from at the same time. And so, you know, whether it's Michael Jackson or Miles Davis or whatever, it's just a bit, you know, you could say we just look at things with complexity, but it goes back to we see the thing as it is. And so many things in the world are either nor. You know what I mean? They're not like left and right or, you know, good or bad. They're both and neither, maybe. And so Taxi Driver to me was always kind of like that, a thing that I had to acknowledge on a certain level had a profound effect on my understanding of what moving images could do. But at the same time, it was completely entangled with this thing that's like, you know, it's just like it's like a virulent text. Mm-hmm. And then even in terms of like internally, if you say in the culture, in the community and stuff, Miles Davis is kind of the penultimate, even though there's 1,000 examples of it, he's a penultimate figure like that. Like people say, oh, you're obsessed with Miles Davis, he's your hero. I was like, I would never call Miles my hero because he's an unrepentant wife beater. Yeah. You know, and not to say that like one wife that gets beaten is better than any other wife, but he was like beating up Cicely Tyson of all people, you know? And in his biography, he's laughing about it. He tells a joke that is so troubling. It's like demonic. And, I could see it's a bad joke, I guess you would say. Like, who reports on themselves in their own autobiography? That shows you how unaware he was of how fucked up it was, you know? He just tells the story of having Cicely Tyson, being physical with her and throwing her downstairs, and she's hiding in the basement, calls the policeman, and the policeman come, and Miles and the policeman are at the top of the stairs laughing at Cicely Tyson, who's at the bottom of the stairs. I mean, that is so mind-bogglingly. This is the same guy who got his head knocked in by a policeman outside of his own performance. Very famously photographs of him bleeding from the head, And so the inability to see the problematic of that is like, but at the same time, he's a fucking genius. It's like undeniable that his music gets at things that, I don't think there's very little music that we've made. And we've made the most incredible music that goes beyond it in terms of the complexity of Black feeling, introspective, and all these kinds of things.
Yeah, but that's that thing though, genius and monsters, or the monster is always there, It's the same thing, like, oh, you gotta be on drugs to be a great artist or something like that. There's like these things that seem to be dual that I kind of resist myself. Yeah. There was a point where I was very disturbed. It just seemed like everybody who's really great is fucked up, But, and you want to be great, but you don't want to be fucked up. So it's like, but then you realize it's not really true that everybody who's great is fucked up. There's a lot of people who are really great who are not fucked up individuals. It's just that there's something about the fucked up individuals that draws more attention or something, John Coltrane, far as I can tell, he was a great guy. Yeah. His kids loved him, his wife loved him, his peers loved him. Everybody said he was a very spiritual person. And you couldn't be more intense in your work than John Coltrane. But I had to acknowledge for myself that much as I love Coltrane as a model, as a human being, and even as a model for how he approached his art, like the intensity, the scientific, like A.B. Sewell would say, John Coltrane worked himself into a genius, right? As much as I admire that, I can't lie, I identify more with Miles. Like the music, not him the person, but the music calls my soul in a different way than Coltrane's music calls. But I want to stay on this, AJ, because I think in A Kingdom Cometh As, A Kingdom Cometh As, which is, the film that kind of is an exploration of gospel, but in a way how Blackness is represented through what I consider religious abstraction. Mm-hmm. Like we have the moniker of Jesus, but there's a lot of other stuff that's being talked about. And there's a moment, it's not Tremaine Hawkins, but there's a sister who was talking about her addiction. She had moved to LA.
I know what you're talking about. I can't remember her name right now, yeah.
She had moved to LA, and at 12, she had started going to the clubs with her parents. And then she started doing drugs, and she was a great singer, had all these opportunities. And then she kept coming back to this refrain, but I had a grandmother who prays.
Right.
And then she talks a little bit more, and she talks about getting high. And in a way, she's celebrating her life of sin. I was out there. I was way out there. I was out there, and I get high, but I had a grandmama who prays. Right. And I think what I'm trying to get at is back to your word, quantum. For a long time, books only gave me the word double consciousness. Mm-hmm. And it was always about a kind of holding black and white together.
Right.
But there were other more complicated consciousnesses that we hold.
Right.
And it's like, holding varying versions of blackness together.
Right.
Holding familial blackness with religious blackness, with fraternal blackness, with artistic blackness, with self. And, if I get crazy with it, it's like, I've been thinking about Joseph Albers all day. It's like, I got to deal with the whiteness in my blackness. Mm-hmm. But I feel like that quantamic thing that you were talking about, I'm suggesting that in Miles or in the complexity, that folk are doing their thing and they have the gift. And it is also true that they are horrible men.
And women.
And women. And they're doing their thing.
Yeah.
Horrible people. Doing their thing, and in a way, the thing starts to maybe even give them permission to be a bad person. Or they're doing their thing, we talked about this with Michael. Yeah. They're doing their thing, and then it's like, well, why would a mother let her son go to Neverland, whatever the fuck.
In the bed with Michael Jackson.
So then you're doing your thing, and then there's like approval and desire and acceptance. And then it's like, I don't know all these words, a kind of complicitness.
Yeah.
But
that's why they are Orishas. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
They're not put there to like say, I want to be like so-and-so. They're put there like almost like, they have philosopher's stones like in China, and it's like you're supposed to meditate about it. They're put there as entities for us to think about what those forces look like in life, in the world, and what choices, what the implications of those choices are. Like, it's like this goes back to the whole, waning. I hope I'm wrong about this, but waning superpower of black folks to keep the shit real, Like, we didn't keep the shit real when it came to Obama, say, for example. We're not nearly as critical of Obama as we were of all the white presidents who deserved the criticism that they got from the black community, because we always said it like it was. Mm-hmm. But all of a sudden, we got somebody who looked like us, and we gave them a pass.
Yeah.
They did a lot of fucked up shit. Great. Looks great, the most stylish president of all time, beautiful wife and all that. Yeah, I can agree on that, but did a lot of fucked up shit. And so the thing is like, whatever that is, that's the thing. If anything, I sound so old now, worries me, it's like the loss of that. So all of a sudden we want to start being Cartesian in our thinking again, and we get locked into this. It's not so much associative thinking, but a kind of tethered thinking. Like, so for example, Bill Cosby. Okay, he was a serial rapist and he did the Cosby Show. Both of those things can't be true. So if the Cosby Show was as revolutionary as we all agreed it was, then he could not have been a serial killer. I'm a serial rapist. Right. And if he was a serial rapist, then the Cosby Show is not as good as we thought it was. Let's go look for the worm in the apple. No, both things are true. Yeah. It is what it is. The good guys don't just wear white hats and the bad guys wear black hats. Yeah. That's not how the world is. See, we were the motherfuckers in the past. If a bad guy came in with a white hat, we would say, that's a bad person with a white hat on. Yeah. Or vice versa. Yeah. That is a good person who is stuck with a black hat for whatever reason, or they think it looks good, or whatever. Yeah. So I just think it's like once we get into that kind of thinking, it's like our facilities to be seeing it like it is start to break down, and they don't function as well. Because I don't think we would have ever survived the circumstances that we've been in if we hadn't had that superpower, to see the shit for what it was. Yeah. And don't confuse me with what we want it to be, or how it should be, or what's fair. Like my son, I don't know. My son, he came to me like when he was in the maybe 4th or 5th grade, and he was in social studies. This was like elementary school. He says, "Dad, we were talking about Birmingham and the civil rights struggle today, in our social studies, maybe 5th grade." And he said, I said, yeah, what did you think about that, He said, they made black people sit on the back of the bus. I said, yeah, and what did you think of that? He said, it wasn't very nice. And I tried not to laugh. I was like, you're right, son, it wasn't very nice, you know what I mean? But it's just,
Yeah.
There's a way, you know what I mean, of like understanding these things.
Yeah.
It's like we want the best for our kids, but there's a way in which the very second after segregation is legally ended, everybody that's born from that second can't comprehend what it was like before. I mean, some of the urgency I have around certain things I want to do before I'm out of here is because I've come to understand that my kids, who are 20 years apart, my daughter's 40, my son is 19, they cannot comprehend like some of black people's reality prior to the moment that they were born in. You know what I mean? It's just not even, you describe it to them and they just like look at you. They can't quite, what do you mean you couldn't just go into McDonald's? Or what do you mean you couldn't drink out of a water? What do you mean you couldn't go into that part of town or something like that, you know? And so I just feel a certain urgency to kind of try to render it in some kind of way for somebody who didn't even experience the heat of it, was like born at the very end of it. Like my first grade class in Tupelo, Mississippi was the first integrated class in the history of Tupelo, Mississippi.
Wow.
So like I remember distinctly the parents talking about it, how some of the black parents would not send their kids.
Sure.
Everybody thinks black people want to rush to be in school with white folks. It wasn't, that's not the reality of it, you know? A lot of people like, no, but I remember my first grade teacher, Mrs. Chittum, me and my cousin Angela and Sheila Ashby were the first 3 black students that she'd ever taught.
Wow.
And I think she had this idea, she was a liberal, I could say that with some assurity. She was a nice person, a good person. She had this idea that she was going to work very hard to make sure that we caught up with and could function on the level of our peers. And, you know, by a month into the first grade class, I was tutoring people. She had put me off to the side in a section where I was tutoring kids, reading to kids. Like, I'm not bragging about this, I'm just saying, my godmother, Mrs. Herbine Reese, ran one of the, I would say the most famous, or not famous, that's a weird used in a small town, but she ran a kindergarten. So I was in the kindergarten since I was like 3 years old.
Yeah.
You know, and the reason I ended up in Tupelo, not with my parents, but with my grandparents in the first grade was because I was so bored.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't turn 6 until November 30th, which was generally you had to be 6 to start first grade at the beginning of the school year in Alabama, where my parents, we were living at the time. So they sent me to live with my grandparents for that year so I didn't have to stay in kindergarten for another year. So she came to so I saw her in the first grade, didn't see her again until I got married. In 1983, 84, her daughter, she had been retired for years, brought her from Tupelo to Clarksdale to attend my wedding. I had not seen her since first grade. She said she never forgot me.
That's amazing. That's amazing. You know, the way that we're talking about.
And hold on, one little thing. And that's not to say I was so unique. I'm just trying to say people had these preconceptions about who black people were. Even good people had these preconceptions.
Yeah. I want to go back to Taxi. This was all kind of...
Oh, right, Taxi Driver, forget it.
This is all... It's our prelogue.
We were taking the roundabout.
Yeah, I mean... But I think that in the same way that you're talking about Ben being racist and the film potentially being racist, Ben also has moments of promise and moments of like self-reflection. And then the film also wanted to do something else. And that's ultimately what you made it. Like the film had other strategies in it that didn't come to light. And I want you to talk about that.
Well, I should just describe it first because people don't know. Have people here seen Taxi Driver? Well, some people. I was surprised at how many people hadn't seen, especially younger people, hadn't seen Taxi Drivers. Travis Bickle, he's this like disassociated, angry incel, right? You know what we call an incel now. And he basically, he decides he's gonna assassinate this presidential candidate. When that goes sideways, he reverts to his second plan, which is to go save Iris, Jodie Foster, 12-year-old prostitute, from from the pimps and people. She's she's a sex worker. And in the film, he goes in, he basically just shoots everybody, kills everybody in his quest to save her. I was very disturbed by this film. Like I said, when I first saw it, I was both mesmerized, particularly by the end of it. Like the filmmaking in the end of it is bonkers. It is like a Charlie Parker or a John Coltrane solo. It's just really amazing the way it's put together. But I was really disturbed by it, and couldn't quite put my finger on why I was disturbed by it. I mean, the obvious thing was like, it's a racist text. That's why you're disturbed by it. I was like, no, it's something else I couldn't quite. And a few years later, when I was in D.C. at Howard, I saw the film again, and I read something about it, and it said that in Paul Schrader's original script, the pimp who Harvey Keitel plays in the film was originally supposed to be black. And when Rob De Niro goes to the bordello and kills everybody in there was supposed to be black. The pimp was supposed to be black. Yeah, the night manager, the John, like everybody in there was supposed to be black except Jodie Foster. So he was supposed to come in and just shoot everybody. And they say, the studio said, nah, we can't do this because black folks are gonna riot. Which is, I repeated that in the past, but I don't really believe that. People said that by Do the Right Thing, black people were gonna riot. Black people were like laughing when they saw the shit in reality. But I think the truth of it is more like this. The image of Jodie Foster being handed around by black men made the shit a non-starter. That was a non-starter. They could claim it was because black people was gonna riot, but nah, that shit was not gonna get made, right?
You're saying you don't think the studio was ready for an image of a white, delicate flower being corralled by a group of African American.
Passed around. Like, and so, and then the other thing too is like, in a way, like the Scar character, and I call him the Scar character, the pimp, he's called a sport in the movie, but the film was always a kind of remake of John Forster's Searchers, which is a film where John Wayne, his brother-in-law and his brother-in-law's wife, who's his true love, they have two little girls. And while John Wayne, he's introduced in the beginning of the movie as a guy who never turned in his sword at the end of the Civil War. So he was a Confederate soldier who never gave up. He shows up, he goes away, the natives, the savages attack his brother and his sister-in-law's house. They kill everybody except the two girls and take the two girls. And it's called The Searchers because 85% of the movie is him and the half-brother, one of the girls, who's half Native American, are searching for the girls. And in the beginning, he's searching to save them, but by the end of the film, you can't tell if he's gonna kill them when he finds them, because at that point, they've grown up around Native Americans. I think one of the girls had kids or, whatever. They've been fucking them, basically. Okay, so that's the thing so it's like an unambiguously racist character. And in a way, Taxi Driver is a remake of that. So my pimp, like, I think this is what you're starting to get at. What the film basically does is, first of all, just replaces the Harvey Keitel with the black actor. It replaces the night manager with the black actor. It replaces the John who's with Jodie Foster when he comes in with the black actor. And so it was the idea that I had, like, damn near 30 years ago, like literally.
Okay, so put a pin in that. So what I love is if the way the world articulates what your practice has been, it was all found images. In this case, we're not talking about found images. We're talking about a story where you've posited your character, you've removed characters, and then had character actors, black. You've replaced those white characters with black characters on the original film story.
Yeah, damn, we should have talked about, man, let me just, this is like
it's so cold, bro.
I don't know if it's possible. Is it possible to project anything here?
Shit.
I know this is in the last second. Probably not. Nah, okay, next time. But basically, like Tia said, it's like very It's seamless. It's surgical. Like if you haven't, like people who went in and saw it and didn't know the movie, they were just like, we don't get it. Like, what is it? Because they, it's kind of like if you saw Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and the reindeer was jet black or something, you know what I mean? Like you would be like, whoa, but if you had never seen it, you wouldn't necessarily think anything of it.
I want to keep, if we can just stay here, because we got to take questions and stuff. I know we got to go. We're going to go. But imagine main character comes in, Ben comes in, he's ready to shoot somebody. He turns. When he turns, there's a white guy that's the white John. AJ edits that moment, then recreates that moment on green screen.
Right.
Replacing him with the black John. Right? So it's like, it's a, in some cases, a 30th of a second, or and that you're matching shot for shot. And that feels like it requires such a level of cinematographic, videography, such complicated knowing. You like this? That, it's an obsessiveness that only a person that looks closely at film is willing to kind of split hairs to make sure that the gaze matches the positionality of the other character. I'm telling you, for me, this is cold. It's cold because it is not found, it's another kind of intelligence within the craft that is akin to me to surgery.
Like,
I'll stop.
The thing I compare it to is like jazz guys taking Tin Pan Alley tunes and working them.
Yeah.
John Coltrane doing my favorite thing. It's like re-recording it over and over. And if you haven't seen Julie Andrews Running Through the Hills or Live with the Sound of Music, you're not fully appreciating what it means for a black person to twist this thing, twist it in on itself. And so it's a little like that, but it's also like a very weird kind of acknowledgement of this discrepancy thing I'm talking about, how it's a little bit of a voodoo doll for me. It's a little bit of I have to admit, I'm mesmerized by the filmmaking, you know what I mean? And I'm inserting myself. I have this whole thing I call ill sons and daughters, or abdads. It's just saying, so like, an abdad is like a person who engendered you, but who doesn't know you exist. It's like the opposite of a bastard. It's like the progenitor of a bastard. They have the whole anxiety of influence, but I feel like for myself, a lot of times I feel something that's the opposite of the anxiety of influence, the anxiety of not being acknowledged as an offspring, So I feel like, like a Donald Judd or Martin Scorsese or Stanley Kubrick, they don't know you exist, but they make this stuff in the world and it makes you in a weird kind of way. Like you don't get to choose who makes you. You get made by forces and things that existed before you were engendered or came into being. And then you have to find yourself inside of these forces that have shaped you. So you're neither just the product, but nor are you just an independent author of who you are. And so a little of it's kind of like that.
Ladies and gentlemen, Arthur Jafa.